thing we have to fear is
in war,
fear itself.
there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we burn, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to the intersection of faith and politics. This is WallBuilders Live. You can find out more at wallbuilderslive.com and also wallbuilders.com. I'm Rick Green here with David Barton and Tim Barton. Our subject today, guys, is it's actually a hot topic all across the country. It started in just a few states, California and Colorado, but now there are a lot of states that are approaching this issue of the legalization of marijuana. And, fellas, it really has become a major debate between, for instance, libertarians and conservatives over what the proper role of government is.
Yeah, and by the way, we got to say on this thing, one of the ways you can know not only the proper role of government, I mean, you know the proper role of government by going back to the Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence sets out the philosophy of government. The Constitution defines how that philosophy works on the ground. You have that. You also judge a tree by its fruits. And so you can look at the results that are produced. We had, I think, on this last election, 2012, 6 states voted on marijuana use of some type, way, shape, fashion, or form. Some for recreational, some for medical. So you've had enough of this going on now that you can actually measure results and see. That's what we did with tobacco. We said, you know what? Look what it's doing to health, and because government's involved in health care, and we can debate whether that should have been or not, nonetheless, it's costing the government billions and billions. What it's doing with secondhand smoke to others. And so government got involved as a safety thing. Now, liberty folks would say it shouldn't be doing that. That's a debate for something else. But what you can make a clear debate on is when you go back to the Declaration, it says, number one, there's a creator. Number two, the creator gives certain set of guaranteed rights. Number three, government exists to protect those rights. Number four, there are fixed moral laws. And that's where liberty people and conservatives...
by the way, that's what is known as the laws of nature and as nature's God.
That's right. And those fixed moral laws, the laws of nature, nature's God, they transcend any kind of majority vote. That's why any type of vote that we ever have in America on whether rape is a crime or not, it doesn't matter if 100% of the nation votes that rape is not a crime, it will still be a crime because it violates the laws of nature, nature's God. We don't get to vote on certain fixed moral laws that God has already very clearly said is right or wrong. The same thing with inalienable rights. The second point in the Declaration, we don't vote on that. It doesn't matter if 100% of the nation tells me I don't have a right to defend myself. I do have a right to defend myself because the nation didn't give me that right. God gave me that right. So on that aspect, if you don't get that viewpoint that there are fixed moral rights and wrongs and there are certain rights that are not to be touched, abridged, regulated, anything else by government, then you won't really have liberty. It becomes a majoritarian kind of a vote. And if we're going to have the majority tell me what my liberties are and the majority tell me what my morals are, that doesn't work for running a nation. So that's where there is, and while both sides want liberty, and I'm a huge liberty guy, I'm not a moral liberty guy. If God's taken a position, and if the laws of nature, nature's God have taken a position, and if inalienable rights have laid out what it is, then I don't care what the vote is. That's a fixed part of our government.
And let me jump into the notion isn't even just libertarians and conservatives, because ultimately if we back up and say as Christians, we have Christians that are definitely libertarians and Christians that are definitely conservative. But as Christians, we should be thinking differently anyway. And if you're not a Christian, then we have a different discussion. But ultimately, the two things it comes down to is what does the Bible say? And then if you're not a Christian, then I would just say, well, let's just judge a tree by its fruits, and let's just see what works. Let's see if it's productive. But as a Christian, we ought to be going, what does the Bible say about this issue? And whatever the Bible says, that's what I stand on. And this notion even of liberty, where Paul explained it was for freedom that Christ set us free. But the freedom was not then that we could go out and do whatever we wanted. Paul explained in Romans, we don't sin that grace may abound. Forbid it. That's not what we do. Well, then we want to see what God's standard is. And now we understand in the Declaration, that was the way our nation, our Constitution was laid out, that there was a principle that God had a standard that we were going to operate under this nation. But as a Christian especially, We want to be measuring what does the Bible say, and the Bible's pretty clear on this issue. When you see even in creation, when God put man in the garden, and God told Adam that I give you dominion, you are in charge, you rule over all living things. Well, if you think about the notion that man is supposed to rule over all living things, that means nothing is supposed to rule over man. And when you start taking something and putting it in your body that all of a sudden rules over you now, this is where you have a problem, whether it be with marijuana or alcohol or all kinds of other drugs we could talk about. Anytime that you do not have dominion, Peter explained that you need to be sober-minded, be vigilant. Well, marijuana does not help you be sober-minded or vigilant.
For sure. Yeah, not at
and
all.
so you just start thinking about this as a Christian. What does the Bible say? And it becomes real clear that this is not a biblical position that I can support. But then just practically, you start looking and say, what does it produce? And it's pretty easy to see that marijuana does not produce in a culture, in a family, in a nation, the kind of things that are beneficial for those.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing now is states like Colorado who have now had this for a bit, they're starting to get statistics back, and it ain't what it was cut out to be. The statistics are all coming in negative, not positive. And so we thought we'd have one of our good friends from Colorado, State Senator Greg Brophy, and Greg is stuck with the result of the vote. It's a 55% vote. That's what Colorado voted. That's what the policy now is in Colorado. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like what the results are. But we now have plenty of negative results. So let's go to Colorado, and this is one of the most recent states to do it. This is 2012, and you see the results that are there, and then there's a lot more results we'll cover as well later.
State Senator Greg Brophy when we return right here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In several decisions over recent years, the Supreme Court has consistently ruled that it is unconstitutional for the government to encourage religion. Did our founding fathers agree with this? Consider the words of Henry Lawrence, a signer of the Constitution and a president of Congress. Henry Lawrence declared, "I had the honor of being one who framed that Constitution. In order effectually to accomplish these great ends set forth in the Constitution, it is especially the duty of those who bear rule to promote and encourage respect for God and virtue, and to discourage every degree of vice and immorality." Founding Father Henry Lawrence believed that the goals of the Constitution could not be fulfilled apart from a fear and a respect for God, and that it was therefore the duty of government to encourage this among the people.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here at WallBuilders Live. Our guest today, our good friend State Senator Greg Brophy from Colorado. Always good to have you, Greg. Thanks for coming on, sir.
Well, thanks. It's always good to be with you.
Hey, man, you guys have had quite the experiment taking place out there with the legalization of marijuana. We just wanted to kind of get an update from you. Saw an interesting article on harmful side effects already showing themselves in Colorado. Wanted to see what you thought about those results and whether it was something that was really measurable at this point.
Well, most of what we saw in that article that you and I both read were effects related to the period where we went through the medical marijuana ruse. 2012 was when we actually voted in Colorado, 55% to legalize marijuana, and it didn't become legal then until January 1st of this year, so a little over a year after the vote. Most of the statistics that we have to this date are from that period in time from, say, 2009 or so, 2009, when the marijuana industry figured out to exploit the loophole in the medical marijuana law here in Colorado. So if you're concerned about these harmful side effects, think about that when you start looking at medical marijuana. Now, so I look at these things and I say, yes, all of this is true. There is more DUIs related to marijuana. There's more use among our youth than there used to be. That one really bothers me. We see a lot more drug tests positive in the workplace now than we have before. So some of these things are starting to come through. And then here's what's interesting in that too, Rick. I mean, in part, some of the people who were selling this used the ruse that we would get a lot of tax revenue out of it.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
that's not true. There's not near as much tax revenue from any of these vices. I don't care if it's alcohol, gambling, or now marijuana to cover the societal costs that they bring. And at the same time, got to remember, Rick, I'm a liberty guy.
Yeah.
So if 55% of the people in my state say that they see this as an individual liberty issue and that they want it to be available for adults, then I'm not going to stand here and tell them no.
Well, how do you when you say ruse on the medical marijuana? Because a lot of our listeners in other states, that's the first step that usually comes in, and they're seeing that begin to make its way to the legislature now. So when they did that in 2009, when they came in and said, hey, it's just for medical purposes, did everybody pretty well know, hey, it's going to be a lot more than that, and there's going to be these clinics that just give it to everybody? Or did everybody kind of think, okay, it will just be for these special medical situations?
Well, remember now, the medical marijuana amendment to our Constitution passed in 2000, and everybody thought it was just for cancer patients who wanted an alternative to some of the opium-based drugs that you get for pain management, et cetera. It wasn't until about 8 or 9 years later when some entrepreneurs in California figured out that there really isn't any definition with regard to the medical conditions that you have to qualify to use marijuana for medicinal purposes. And they started exploiting it in California, and it rapidly moved here to Colorado, I think within months. And that's when, something like 10 doctors wrote the recommendations for the vast majority of the people who ended up obtaining a medical marijuana license. And then, then that just kind of blew the doors off. And here on the Front Range of Colorado and in some of the mountain communities, the use was fairly rampant. So the stats we're seeing right now are mostly related to that. And I don't really think usage has gone up a tremendous amount since we legalized it statewide. It's changed just a little bit.
Because it was pretty much already readily available.
It was readily available. If you had a sore knee, you could have the recommendation for pain management. It was just a matter of, did you want to pay the doc $150 and did you want to buy the license for it? And then you could.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Then you could get marijuana fairly easily in most of the Front Range community.
Yeah, I was thinking about reasons why you could put down on paper. I mean, I wonder if anybody actually said, I'm feeling too smart. I want to be stupid. Can I that's my medical condition, so I'd like to be able to smoke some pot and become stupid quickly. So what do you think? I mean, nationally, is it? Do you think Colorado will be the example now, and a lot of states are going to follow suit? I don't even know the numbers on how many states have the medical marijuana legalized at this point, but it's
in the 30s now.
Wow. So that model is what's growing.
Yes, and it's a ruse. And the ruse will be quickly exploited. And I think that across most of the U.S., marijuana for recreational purposes will be legal within the decade.
Wow. Our guest, State Senator Greg Brophy, back in a moment here on WallBuilders Live.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In the minds of many today, government is a purely secular institution and is not in any way to be joined to religious principles. The result is that too often our public policies are now enacted without any consideration of their spiritual consequences. However, the Founding Fathers believed that even a political act should always be examined from a spiritual viewpoint. For example, in his inaugural address, President George Washington declared, "We ought to be persuaded that the favorable smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained." President George Washington believed that the blessings of heaven would reside on this nation only so long as its national policies embraced godly standards.
For For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. State Senator Greg Brophy from Colorado is our guest today. We've been talking about an article that shows all these negative side effects to the marijuana use there in Colorado. And you mentioned the number one concern out of those seven, negative trends for you was the youth going up. I forget what it was, something like 26% of college-age students compared to about 18 nationally, 26% in Colorado in 2012. So is that, does that mean we've got a whole generation now that it's just more acceptable and not only going to be used more, but also not be a negative when you find out somebody else is using?
Yeah, to me, it's actually gotten kind of sexy here in Colorado. The media covered nothing but marijuana for almost the entire month of January. Our stupid local daily newspaper here in Denver, the Denver Post, has a whole section dedicated to it. And then the alternate newspapers that are even more popular amongst younger people here in the metro area, the Denver metro area, cover it with a great deal of relish. And so I'm worried that it's become the new cool thing here. It seems like we whipped tobacco use fairly well. Probably got it down. My wife and I were talking about this. There's probably a base level of tobacco use that we'll never get rid of. And I think we're rapidly approaching that because we've made tobacco so uncool.
Yeah, yeah.
And we were getting there with alcohol. I think we're getting there with alcohol. And now we've come in here in Colorado, which is the biggest mistake of the whole thing, and made marijuana cool instead of recognizing it for what it really is, a stinky, nasty, dangerous product that we need to keep away from our kids to the greatest extent that we can. So what we really need to do as a state, this is my recommendation for legislators and people in other states, is get ahead of the curve and really make it scary for an adult to provide marijuana to a kid. Make it highly likely that you will get caught, and make the penalty enough that it will deter people from providing marijuana to kids, because that's it's bad for you no matter what. Like you said, smart people will make you stupid. The disproportionate effects on a developing body and a developing mind are something that we can't ignore as a society. Even a liberty guy has to recognize that.
Yeah. And lastly, let me just ask you: are many of your colleagues that supported this as they see more data? Do you think their opinion will change? I mean, were there many that were kind of on the fence, or was this kind of a you were either definitely for it or definitely against it kind of a thing?
I don't think anybody's minds are being changed by this, according to the polling that we're seeing here in Colorado. I think if the question were on the ballot again, it would pass with very near the same amount of support. I didn't think it was going to pass because I thought people were disgusted by what was going on with the medical marijuana ruse, but 55%. And I've seen cross sections of ballots where a significant percentage of Republicans in El Paso County, for instance, voted for marijuana legalization. People who voted for Romney also voted for marijuana legalization.
Wow. Interesting.
I think it's here to stay, and we're going to have to deal with it like we deal with the after effects of alcohol, like we deal with the after effects of gambling. All of the vices cause societal problems, and as a society, we have to deal with them to the best of our ability.
Yeah, and I wonder, has anybody really talked much about having a modernized version of the, just say no to drugs kind of a thing, where you're like you're saying, the perception of it, you're telling kids the truth about what it does. I mean, I think about the smoking ads, like you said. I mean, that worked, and those ads that even still stick in my mind, where the guys are looking cool, and then all of a sudden they're in the wheelchair and just falling apart because of the negative effects. Ad campaigns like that do work because the perception of the public, they begin to see what those things do to you. Is that something that anybody talked about as being a way to counter this? And is that even the role of government? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, if it's the role of state government. But I'm certainly willing to have that discussion. And it may be because it's the one entity that covers the entire boundaries. I mean, if you turn this over only to the schools, then you miss some kids. If you turn it over only to the municipalities, then you miss the people in the smaller, less populated areas of the state. But it is real that it's part of the education process, I suppose, and I do think that it ought to be under local control, but certainly advocated by people like me in my position.
Well, Senator, we appreciate your time, man. God bless you. Appreciate you coming on, and let's we'll hopefully see you soon.
Thank you, Rick, for all you do. I hope to see you soon.
All right, buddy. Appreciate it. That's Greg Brophy from Colorado. Stay with us. David Barton when we return. Have you ever wanted to learn more about the United States Constitution but just felt like, man, the classes are boring, or it's just that old language from 200 years ago, or I don't know where to start? People want to know, but it gets frustrating because you don't know where to look for truth about the Constitution either. Well, we've got a special program for you available now called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green, and it's actually a teaching done on the Constitution at Independence Hall in the very room where the Constitution was framed. We take you both to Philadelphia, the cradle of liberty in Independence Hall, and to the WallBuilders Library, where David Barton brings the history to life to teach the original intent of our founding fathers. We call it the Quick Start Guide to the Constitution because in just a few hours through these videos, you will learn the Citizen's Guide to America's Constitution. You'll learn what you need to do to help save our constitutional republic. It's fun, it's entertaining, and it's going to inspire you to do your part to preserve freedom for future generations. It's called Constitution Alive with David Barton and Rick Green. You can find out more information on our website now at wallbuilders.com.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here on WallBuilders Live. Thanks to State Senator Greg Brophy for joining us as well. Man, guys, I don't even know where to start on this. It's obvious. I mean, Greg's saying, look, bad results. He seems to think it's coming, and we better be prepared to change the public's perception about the issue, let alone win legislative battles.
Well, we're about to get into some judge a tree by its fruits kind of stuff here that is worth throwing out. But before we do that, one point I got to make, this shouldn't even be a discussion because current federal law makes recreational marijuana use illegal under federal law. We shouldn't even be talking about this. Oh, but wait, we have somebody in the White House who doesn't believe in enforcing federal law, just believes in making it with a pen and a phone. But this should not even be a discussion because this is another one, and I think Ted Cruz has documented now 74 laws that the president has deliberately said, I don't care what the law says, I'm not doing it. And here's another one, choosing which laws he will and won't enforce. As he said in one of his speeches, I can do whatever I want. So
kings are allowed to do that.
Thank you.
Wait.
That was a different government.
King.
But
my fault.
But that's a mentality. But nonetheless, we shouldn't be having this discussion. But there's plenty of negative effects out there.
Senator Brophy pointed this out with statistics coming out of Colorado, and the statistics they have are from when it was just medicinal marijuana, although the loophole was that you could get medicinal marijuana for anything you wanted.
I stubbed my toe.
That's right. I don't feel good. I would like to feel better. Give me marijuana. And the reality is, even though he's saying that by and large the population was already where it is, what they've seen is that actually is not entirely the case, because now you have more and more kids that are being impacted by this. Well, they weren't impacted by medical marijuana. There was a restriction on that. Now that there's not a restriction, it is much more rampant. And so ultimately the statistics are only going to get worse.
Well, we've already seen that in Colorado. Homelessness for teenagers has gone through the roof since marijuana use has come in.
That's right.
So that's another indication of growing teen use.
Well, it's going to be interesting also to watch these college kids it's growing and very rampant. In fact, Senator Brophy explained that it's really kind of a sexy perception in Colorado, but to see how many of them are actually finish their degree program, because if you're smoking marijuana, you're probably not going to class, you're probably not paying attention, you're most likely not passing. But you start looking at some of this stuff, and it's crazy. Some of the arguments that people use in favor of it is, well, marijuana, it's not harmful, it's not addictive, it's just something for fun. But the problem is, you start looking at the people that get addicted to marijuana, and you see ultimately it is addictive, number one, but you see the repercussions it has. It's not just some fun, harmless thing. There's more than 400,000 emergency room visits every year. Marijuana is leading to psychotic episodes, panic attacks, schizophrenia. You see the dangers that are on the roads. You start measuring this.
Well, by the way, one of the reasons that federal law outlaws it is marijuana has always been seen as the gateway drug to harder stuff.
Absolutely.
And the harder stuff you get into, the more violence you get into to get the harder stuff. And it's like pouring. I didn't really light the fire. I just poured gasoline on the fire and gave the guy a match. I can't help it if it went up in flames, and that's what marijuana does.
Right. And some of but some of these arguments in favor of it, I just want to point these out because they're so ridiculous that people need to understand the flaws of these arguments, where some people say, well, if we would legalize marijuana, there wouldn't be as many people in jail and prison. Well, you have 0.3 of 1% of people that are in prison because of marijuana. This is not the reason we have overcrowding in prisons. Or you look at something like only 8% of Americans actually have ever smoked marijuana. And people are going, well, it's, all these issues and problems. No. We're talking about a small population. However, if you legalize it, the only option is that this population grows. When you make it readily available, and what you see just by judging the fruits, it does not produce the things that you want to see in culture. This is a bad deal, just judging the tree by its fruits.
And Colorado's got evidence now that this is a bad tree to have growing in your fruit orchard.
Unfortunately, I think we're going to get more and more of that evidence, but hopefully that'll be enough to change the perception and keep it from happening in all of our states. Thanks for listening today, folks. You've been listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand until